Hi there, Dan students. I'm your mentor, Chris. Um, so I'm just going to make this week's webinar about a sort of general introduction and kind of talk about my career in data science, what I did, how DAND helped me, and what I think might be good next steps. Because as you're probably already aware, DAND is a nice starting point, but by itself, it will be difficult to get a job with that alone. So perhaps I can talk to you about how I got my first job in data science, and Dan was definitely a useful part of that. Let me share with you how I leveraged it. Um, so a bit about me. I'm an American. I live in Shanghai, and I've been here for about 5 years now. I have a degree already in a bachelor's in chemistry and a master's in sociology. Um, but I hadn't really done programming. I hadn't really done data science before then, before DAND actually. Um, but I did have some experience doing data analysis as a researcher for some university research projects as a research assistant. I did that for a couple of years for different projects, knowing that I enjoyed academia, but not really wanting to get a PhD, not wanting to make that my career. But I always had the interest in science and in asking big questions and just trying to find answers to questions that I myself ask, which I think is kind of at the core of being a scientist, is having that kind of curiosity. So data science just seemed like a nice in between, doing work that has real world or business impact, but doing it with some of the techniques and ways of thinking of a scientist. So I had already learned some Python programming and taken a bunch of Coursera courses before starting DAND. But DAND really helped me out because the emphasis on projects, I think, is very, very, very important. Um, I did the course about in 2017, and at that time, it was not the way it is now. It was only one continuous term. It took about 8 months for me to complete. And at that time, they had some other modules like an introduction to machine learning, and the projects were different. Um, but some of the things were the same, like particularly the statistics. The SQL stuff was there, data wrangling was there, visualization was Tableau, but I think now they've switched it to Python, probably because they don't want to pay for a Tableau license for all their students, which is quite expensive. Um, but at any rate, I found that the coursework was okay, but the most important thing is definitely the projects. So when I finished DAND, I had some really good. I made an effort to do the harder data sets, the bigger ones, for the data wrangling project, for instance, and the analysis project. And also for the visualization, I chose a larger and more difficult data set to work with because I knew the more effort you put into your projects now, the more impressive they'll be, and they'll definitely help you in your job hunt. So, what I can say without a doubt is that Dan is just a starting point. The most important thing is going to be building your portfolio of projects, and you're probably quite busy with the course now. But after you graduate, or even now, if you have the time, you should consider making an online portfolio. Um, I'll share a link actually. There's a pretty good one. Pretty good instructions for making your own blog. You might have heard of this. It's called DataQuest. DataQuest.io. That's a good website also for learning data. I used their how to make your own blog tutorial, and now I have a blog on GitHub, and I posted some of my projects there, and that's really helpful. Whenever I pass my resume to an employer, I just point them to my blog, and they can go and look and see some of the things I've done and get a very quick idea of what my skill level is. So I encourage you to perhaps follow this or a similar tutorial and make your own online portfolio. So I found my way with Dan and with some of the projects I'd done, as well as a lot of just other learning, because the path of data science is just a constant rush to learn more and more and more. There's always something new. And as you get more experience, I think you'll figure out, data is a very big industry. You have to figure out what path you want to follow, what kind of technologies you're comfortable working with, and what kind of problems you are interested in. And perhaps this was covered in the introduction to the DAND Nanodegree, but you can roughly divide data work into sort of 3 or 4 different categories: business analyst, general data analyst, um, data engineer, data scientist. But there are more. I think increasingly jobs are becoming more and more specific. So like data scientists used to be expected to do everything basically. That's because businesses didn't really know. All they knew was data is useful. They didn't really know how it's useful. They didn't have maybe a clear vision about how to use data, but they knew they had a lot of it, and they wanted to hire someone who can help them figure out what to do with it. And at that time, data scientist uh, is just the general word for anybody who works in data. That's still the case for a lot of small companies and companies that are just now beginning to think about what to do with the data they have. The more mature companies that already have gone through this thought process, they'll have sort of more tailored jobs because now they have maybe a system in place or they have a pipeline, and they know what their needs are a little more clearly. So you'll often see now as well in the more established or bigger companies very clear descriptions about what kind of technologies they hope you can work with. Don't be intimidated by job descriptions when you're applying. Um, they list everything under the sun, and they know no one's going to have everything that they're looking for. But that said, I think I should also emphasize you should probably have an idea of what kind of role you see yourself in, because that will help you determine what technologies you should focus on. There's so much to learn. If you want to be, focused on machine learning, you should focus on that. If you want to be more of a general analyst, I gotta say that SQL is really important. A lot of analysts don't really have a lot of SQL skills, and DAND does a pretty good job of introducing you to post-GRE and querying, but it doesn't really teach you much about database administration or things like that. So I think there are other resources out there that you should explore, like mode analytics, which I will share in the chat here. I can give you more training on SQL. I do think like a lot of people are sort of underprepared when they get a job as a data analyst for how central SQL can be for that role. Python, you may not use that much. In fact, depending on the job, you might just be using SQL and Excel, pulling data and then just doing a basic analysis or cleaning up and presenting it, submitting a report, that kind of thing. That said, Python is definitely a useful skill because it's so versatile and there's so much you can do with it. And of course, if you're going to be building like a machine learning system, Python is probably the way to go for tailored systems. Maybe what else can I say here? Let me see if someone has posted some questions in the group. What is the difference between data, okay, and engineer? Is data the engineer between two of them or something? Okay, this is from Taihi. Thanks, Taihi, for posting these questions. I already think I covered question 1, the difference between a data analyst, and maybe not, I'll go in more detail. So data analyst just does analysis, that's pretty much it. Depending on the company, you'll be working with different technologies. Some companies you'll maybe use Python more because maybe they're not doing a very enterprise level job of storing their data. But most companies, if they have enough data, they're using some kind of database servers. And if it's open source, PostGRE or MySQL or some of the free technologies, or if they want something more sophisticated and maybe higher performance, they'll use something like, let me think of an example. Amazon, I think it's called Amazon Redshift. But in the end, and also free is Google BigQuery. Some companies use that as well. But all of these things, all these databases, relational databases, all use SQL, just some flavor of SQL. So as long as you have solid SQL basics, you'll be able to switch to meet the database that they use for querying, at least. So the analyst just mostly does analysis, basically. You might be asked to find meaning in the data or to find sort of business insights. So an example from my job, I'm frequently told, find something valuable in this data. We have a lot of user data. Management doesn't really know what's in the data, and they don't even really have necessarily clear questions. They might just tell you, we want you to find something useful, which means you have all the responsibility of figuring out like what's of value in there. And that can take a lot of time because the data collection might be quite big. So you should be, even an analyst should be thinking about what kind of questions you want to ask. When you begin the analysis, you should already have some questions in mind that you're going to try to answer, such as, what is the demographic makeup of our population of users? How many are males? How many are females? What are their age groups? And then from there, you take your groups that you've created, and then you start asking questions about those groups. What do females who are aged between 20 and 25 prefer to buy on a Tuesday? So I think you should start with a time frame, and you should start with an idea of what kind of segmentation you want to do, whether it be for users or for products or whatever. That'll help you identify some useful insights faster if you have good questions at the beginning. If you just have no idea where to start and you're just looking at the data, kind of just reading it, trying to find something like that, not really directed, you're going to waste a lot of time. So get in the habit of asking questions as an analyst. That's what you're basically being paid to do. But that said, I want to say that no job is the same. You can see two different positions labeled as data analyst at different companies and have completely different responsibilities. And also, when you're looking for a job and you're sort of doing your research about a company, you should get into the habit also of figuring out asking some clear questions of your interviewer to try to determine what is their stage in the sort of data maturity. Do they have a database? Are they collecting it well? Is their data clean? How much data are they getting in? What are they using the data for right now? Do they have plans to do machine learning or AI? Are they not at that stage? Are they only just doing basic reporting? Where's the data coming from? Is it coming from a web service? Is it coming from customers? Is it manufacturing data? Is it user data? All of these things, it's good to figure all that out in advance so you have an idea of what the job's going to have you do, because you will be spending a lot of time in front of your computer. You're going to want to make sure that you're not bored by it. And then to get back to the question of difference between analyst and engineer. So there is a pretty sharp distinction there. Engineers tend to make things, and that's true of all industries. In the case of data engineering, what they'll do is maybe set up databases. Maybe they'll set up the flow from a service. Say you use an app. They want to make sure that the data coming from the app is being cleaned and aggregated correctly, and maybe sorted or categorized, and just well prepared for analysis at the end of the pipeline. And the pipeline has different steps. Like first data comes in, it gets processed in some way, transformed, maybe transferred to another database, and that could be like an analytics database instead of like a production database. So it might surprise you to learn that a single company, for a single stream of data coming from, say, you, the user, that data will get processed and transferred between many different databases depending on the needs of what the use case is for that data. So if there's like a reporting system, well, maybe there's a reporting system database because the data needs to be in a certain format for that reporting system. And I'm talking, so basically data engineers will set that up. They'll set up the pipelines. They'll make sure that data is coming in correctly. They might help, they'll use high level systems or maybe make their own servers. Depends on the company's willingness to pay for proprietary software. So now there are open source sort of systems that allow people to more easily build pipelines. And a popular one is called Apache Airflow, which Airbnb made and released open source. And then I guess data engineers might also need to learn things like Spark or MapReduce, Hadoop, be familiar with different ways of storing data, different kinds of databases, relational and non-relational. Yeah, I think data engineer is also somewhat closer to computer scientist because they need to be aware of the limitations and of certain structures of databases, like how you program, how you create the database, how you're indexing your data, optimizing it, the pros and cons of structuring your data in a certain way can really affect like read and write speeds into the database. They have to be aware of these things as well. So I would say data engineers, yeah, they have to be fairly expert on the different kinds of data storage and retrieval technologies that are out there, and know how to program a pipeline. You can do that in Python. So I would say the learning curve from data analyst to data engineer is not so substantial. I mean, it's big, but it's possible to make that to go the next step from analyst to say engineer instead of in the direction of data scientist. And now I should say what a data scientist is. So depending on the company, again, there's no clear-cut rule. I'm technically a data scientist, but I spend a lot of my time doing analysis and engineering rather than asking big questions of the data. Sometimes I do that, and sometimes I am asked to design an A/B test to release to propose one, and to come up with hypotheses that I can test. So I do use statistics in my analyses that are more advanced than just taking the mean and the standard deviation. So you might be asked to do that as well. But I guess if you want a simple rule of thumb, I would say that the data scientist is usually, of those three roles, the data scientist is probably the best at statistics, has the highest level of statistics knowledge on the team, because that person will have to do the like high level analysis and hypothesis testing, as well as have an idea about what kind of conditions you need to create in order to do a good experiment, how to sample from the population correctly, how to avoid bias in your analysis and in your experimental design. And probably also the data scientist needs to be able to do machine learning as well. But I don't think data scientists typically have to build a machine learning system. That's kind of in between data scientist and data engineer. If it's purely just like from a programming perspective, just building the system, not really understanding it, that's kind of in the data engineering direction, I'd say. But if you know the problem, you want to classify users, you want to infer gender on your users based on like past data that you have for users who have provided gender information. That's a simple classification task, and I'd say that's in the realm of data science for sure. That has immediate business use too, because companies do want to know what the gender of their users are because it helps with things like recommendations and predictions. Yeah, so I think I've kind of rambled a lot here. That's probably a lot of information. So feel free to follow up with me in our Slack channel group, and if you have any other questions that I can help answer, let me know, or if I can clarify any of these points. One last question here. I think you did. Oh, so to Taihee's other question, yes, I do use machine learning in my job, but not at the level I'd like to. So not like a big system. I haven't put anything in production. but I do use machine learning as an analytical tool because there's many applications beyond the recommendation system. For example, when I wanted to do an A/B test on users to determine, what are people's likelihoods of resubscribing for a service, in order to segment groups, like to make your A/B test sample groups, you need to split them on certain features. Like the group that, how to say, the group that resubscribed, between January and June, and the group that resubscribed between June and December, or male and female, or you know. So if you're able, so for that particular problem, what I did was I made a binary classification, and that was, did the person resubscribe or not? And then I think I used random forest, and I used that in order to figure out what are the most important features for predicting resubscription. And with those features, if your algorithm is telling you that time to, at what time of the year the customer subscribed, if your algorithm is telling you that that's really important, well, that seems like a pretty reasonable test target. So you will do a test on promoting resubscription based on time of year. You split your users into, the January group, the February group, the March group, to see if you can figure out if there's any impact on resubscription rates. That's an example of a multi-group A/B test. I think it's called a multi-armed banded test. But yeah, so that's one application of machine learning, is just to figure out what are some good features, which ones have really good explanatory power in understanding an outcome, or a classification or a regression task. So I think that kind of puts me in the camp of data science more than analyst, the fact that I did something like that. The last question. Are qualified data analysts or data engineers or data scientists required to work on artificial intelligence? It really depends on the company. As an analyst, you're probably not too familiar with machine learning. So if you want to learn machine learning, you have to go further. Take that Coursera Andrew Ng course. I just completed it recently. It's very useful. And I think you can look for opportunities on the job to use machine learning. That's kind of what I do, because I think we're not at a level where we have a business need to do a substantial learning on data. It's more of they're kind of still at the reporting phase in the company I was working for. But definitely they want to go in the direction of AI. So I think if you're qualified, yeah, definitely you'll be expected to do it. And it really depends on the job and the company. And, because it doesn't make, every company can gather data, but it doesn't make sense for every company to do AI. It's hot and it's trending, but when it comes to like the business decision of where are they going to allocate their resources, it wouldn't make sense for them to build up a recommendation system that has very little business impact. Like, for example, you use say a membership app for a Target or some store, and they want to do some sort of recommendation system to push, product coupons or something like that. But they have to do a sort of cost benefit analysis of, is it worth it to build that system if in fact pushing coupons through an app has very little likelihood of you actually using the coupon and barely increases sales? Well, that might be a big waste of money then, and they'll retire that system, or maybe not have bothered to build it in the first place. So AI is not useful for its own sake. There has to be a clear benefit for the company to bother to invest in that. So I think that's one reason in your job hunt, if you want to get into AI, if you want to do machine learning, you should be looking for companies that have a very good use case for it, where the product sort of requires machine learning, requires AI, where that is sort of a very important feature to whatever service they're providing, like Airbnb's dynamic pricing, or Netflix's movie recommendations. Their business models really require that for them to be successful. And I think that's it. Thanks for listening to me ramble for 30 minutes. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions or want some more clarification, just contact me in the Slack channel. Happy Friday, everybody. And that's it for my first webinar. Signing off.